third event. Welcome again to the third event in the Holloway Spring Poetry Series. We're really thrilled to have Francine J. Harris here, reading after Pedro Rolon, who will be introduced by B. Schierenberg, and then Noah Warren will introduce Francine. Very soon, imminently, we'll have two more events on the 8th of April. We're co-sponsoring an event with El Grupo in which Ana Dini Morales and Roberto Tejada will be reading. And then, more Houston. And then on the 14th of April, our virtually residential Holloway poet, Jen Hoffer, will be reading as well. So come back for those. And let's just take it away. So B, if you would speak to Pedro, and then we'll just go right into Noah and Francine. Thank you for being here, all of you.
Yeah, thank you. It is a pleasure, truly, to present Pedro Rolon here today. Pedro is a graduate student in Berkeley's Comparative Literature Department with an emphasis in critical theory. And in multiple ways, their academic work is energized by poetry's tides. For one, this relation is currently taking shape in Pedro's dissertation project on the ocean and Caribbean verse, titled Waves in Time, the Otherwise Practice of the Puerto Rican. And in turn, much of what we will hear now is inspired by the recent work Pedro is doing with Jen Hofer, who will read soon in the series, in a Berkeley workshop called Migratory Ear, Sound as a Generative Strategy. Whatever they take up, in Pedro's hands, things tend to become a time-based art. Preparing my remarks, an image emerges of that bright fountain that is playing in the cavernous center of Pedro's home in Puerto Rico. Maybe that is because, whether in their poetry, whether they are a medium for the tarot, or channeling their noisy synthesizer flows, Pedro's practices with sound can be that way. Writing as echolocation, tracing interiors, receiving voice as the lyric of the so-called world, together create an interesting prickly static. If their language poetry is post, it is also a continuation of its interest towards beauty. Reading, listening invites an everyday mysticism in which denaturalization opens onto sensing, playing itself out. You know, we might be offered here a beautiful heuristic of location. We will hear of heliotropic turns, electrified hair waves, of a radio telescope receiving stars in its collapse, held by plants that know, like queers, of their own slanted being. I am taken by that dense charm, and maybe you'll like it too. Thank you for letting me introduce you, Pedro. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Bea, and thank you so much to Jeffrey and Jess for the invitation, and to everyone for being here. I will read a few poems, and this first poem is called Refutation for Shadow. Swimming the depth of the remnants of night on the shop window, a gray fish in a glass tank behind the greater glass of the structure descends in circles through one version of my head whose curve splits the motion of the tiny fin, and in looking at this mute wreckage, I have pushed the poor fish into some curious transparency amidst all the others. Porous like a dream of flesh, the moment the morning shoots its many arrows, despite our greatest efforts to be sleepers still asleep, to be appropriate. An abstraction of the evening, like the way vapor exits the warmth of the mouth that bore it, even if we know, cannot but continue knowing that these shapes are not the things said or even the ones withheld. We know this heartbreak tenderly, in fact, and we go on, you and I, as I suppose that they do too. I have spent the better part of these days resisting the gaudy motion of inevitables, the stubbornness of solids, the ease with which their certainty tells my sadness to be quiet. In public places, I found it shameful to stare blankly at the flatness of the floor, our looking requiring communicable intention made up exclusively of gesture, at once silent and yet still reverberant, of service to the common cause of not tearing each other apart. Looking for you has been a constant accumulation of redundancies that I am now forced to purify in the fires of my lonely spit if I am ever to leave this house again. And yet I scrape my knees on the glowing sidewalk, looking for a world for you inside that other world, one where the daily theft of light you take from its surfaces is no prerequisite or proof, where density is not the answer to the prayers lovers make to lovers on their way out. In that other world, you are not some repetition of my walking and are instead the praying and the answering together, spinning this stillness into fish-like possibilities offered by the hours that push the always setting sun, glass, edging on glass-like. Neither concave nor convex, you'd settle into the friendship offered by the likes of ghosts, sliding through the things undifferentiated from the patchwork of the objects. You would teach me how to fight this morning that every night begins as. Duet for heliotrope and setting sun. Venturing into rooftops and wondering again, unconcerned with things like near or far, we are shattered in the questions. What became of that flock of sparrows and the horizontal segments in the milky plate of the afternoon rain sky? Then the boundary, the relentless interval as between one finger and a mirror. Then another one, carving holes to offer light in fingerfuls, like the lattice of the plants, wakeful as they rise. But here still, rooftops edging on what disappears, that which does not scratch the throat of songs there. We find that smoke is vertical and irreparably defined by its departing back to itself, back outside. What does the reaching and what of the thing reached for? What can only be appearing to us briefly as a wish denied? My versions with some scattered handprints make my speaking a plume of green, quiet, praying aspects of a dying afternoon. So the next poem I'm going to read is dedicated to those lost in the wake of Hurricane Maria in September 2017. So at this moment, I call on them and also call on those lost in the ongoing US colonial exploitation of Puerto Rico. The veridical existence of the breezes. Upon landfall and undertaken paths of history, long and sinuous impact of the damaged air. Mine, theirs, a clarity, a coming of the soil overturned, of leafless trees disclosing waters, of the floodplain sinking with the stream of names, the mudsliding song of ripping pages. A terrible convulsion, a cruel lash thwarting always. A progress, the devastating Antilles, the lasting interruptions, a polished glass foreseeing. The numerous melancholic occasions scattered on the swirl. Thought, truth, and storm. A universal wind governing admirably the kill. A shadow confounding darkness, the light being a tragic loss, devoid of surfaces, leaving a planilune invisible in this open sea. Look outside. There is the squall of wailing mothers. Gust, a warehouse of seed and plague, atmosphere. A storm is an instrument, like animal life destroys while being itself destroyed. And inside the wail, we hear not the boredom of this mourning dove, and instead the distant swarm of saints, Santa Barbara, San Isidro, San Miguel, Santa Hambre, Santa Sed, San Sereno. A multitude of bodies, billions surge like flattened crop, the ruined vegetation of a setting century, multitude of exhalations altering the air, inflation, gentle touchings of vapors. Hundreds of rooftops rescued, maximum dollars, rotted surface, earth a shedding infrastructure to feed time to the exhales of the tempest. We must leave our houses with blades inside our mouths. I breathe, to my regret, death directly and indirectly the world. Working with the wind, I have seen that life and sleep comfort us. I have seen the requirement is to be a dowser, an organ entirely. Needed also are water, sun, and the bird breath carried in the string, mapping the breezes. And so this is the last poem I'm going to share, and I'm going to try out this share screen situation and hope that it works out. So perfect. This is from a series titled Nephilim Echolocations from a Childhood Fever. Exclusive aerial images of the total collapse of the radio telescope in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Grain, wet interference, static of greens, squalor, the fabricated grid that shapes the concave of the dome remains only the wonder in the mouth of a youth archipelagic, quiet and rusting on the ancient sinkhole, the former home of life marooned. Barrio Esperanza, my tender 12hood, fading light behind. Otherwise, the chosen fledglings of history are promised cycles tethered to the stars, which they take to give the cruelty of forward motion in time, propriety of names like my lovely famine is Rigo, my dwindling sweet breath Betelgeuse, this mute rite of bile and blood and sex and maps, conspicuous Orion, hunter of the airless cold hollows of the sky, beyond the sky. Words to graft from the fetid vapors of the earth while looking up with sore necks from all the wasted gazing into the bright points. But here, the open mouth of the snakewood sea offers conjugations, versions of collapse, glinting in the unforgiving swelter of the equinoctial light that speeds the rot of falling birds. Still, can we not hear in this murmur when the marrow of the metal gnarl bursts and straight lines shatter with the tears of islands floating in the rising salts? Interpret the great archer's rusting bow, perform the final number, the sounding of the fatal field below, floral, small. In the latitudes of forgetting our Lord, we children of the cursed archer, free falling in the hollow words have. Here where they learned to see the sound made by pictures, the lovely ringing of rods and cones, in the giant white eye of the mathematical bull and its abandoned metals, we have a throat, an aching, a satellite, our hungry mouths, a telescope, atavist, How could this not be anything other than a rain of syllables? Green and gray and interlocking squares and triangles with bent rods, materials forced by the torpid hand of who dares wonder where the question, where the vastitude, where the sentence starts or ends, or is it more like a mirror fixed on either side, endless and tired, now forced to learn that all these shards of future spell also the great embrace, punctuated, void, full that we are, stars of the lesser science, silence thickened in the ear space. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro, for those poems of extraordinary power and beauty. It's really quite moving. And yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce Francine J. Harris. And so without further ado, across 3 books, 2012's Allegiance, 2016's Play Dead, and last year's Here's the Sweet Hand, Francine Harris has fashioned an unmistakable new idiom in the poetry of this country. Her line is by turns propulsive and meditative, punchy and vulnerable, public and private, and yet refuses these easy binaries, even as it mines them for power. In Harris's poems, ecstasy is always peeking into history and vice versa. The green world spurts irresistibly up from the gray, and sex and language come curled intimately, boisterously around each other. The layering of sensibility, sensuality, sound, and intelligence in Harris's work means that she can express more nuance in a line than I can in 5 minutes. Nevertheless, I want to briefly sketch 3 thematic clusters that helped organize my thinking on Here's the Sweet Hand. There's a revealing gap between the book's title and its almost title poem. Here is the sweet hand you always turn back on yourself. Taken alone, the book's title strikes us with its deictic presence. Here is. But it is an immediacy that reveals the obvious absence of its referent, the body, the hand, and as such stresses the permanent gap between language at even its most gestural and the embodied world. That hand of the title feels very much like a hand that creates or helps, and that it should also be sweet turns the deixis to epideixis in praise of such benignancy. This is poetry in its guise of company or shelter. But when we arrive at the poem's title, the dark underside of Harris's phrase becomes primary. Here's the sweet hand you always turn back on yourself. We hear pained but clear-eyed self-knowledge that the hand is sweet, stages a recurring fall. What emerges is a habitual past in which the potential for positive, perhaps reparative action is not just lost, but returns as self-reflexive punishment. And in the body of this poem, Harris, echoing Audre Lorde, hints why action has become self-reflexive. Quote, all the tools are crushed. There is a malady of separate conversations converged under the woodpecker's knock-knock. I read this as a sophisticated complaint about the perennial inaccessibility or inarticulability or horizoning of Lorde's vision, where the poles of difference and interdependency might remain mutually tensioned and empowering. Of course, tools do not crush themselves, and the impersonal, quote, there is a malady, feels transparently disingenuous. For there's another hand in the background of these poems in this collection, the invisible hand of sectioning neoliberalism and a well-PR'd patriarchy. These are poems of the Obama and Trump eras and the intimate spaces and the phenomenologies of bodies that Harris traces are profoundly structured by hostilities, both atmospheric and fatally specific. If reflexive action and a pressurized retreat to tight lyric patterning is one response to such a context, whether pointedly hostile or blandly militaristic, another strategy Harris uses is a proliferation of litotic structures, a serial negation of what a habitable Black and queer future isn't. And by future, I mean a present tested for that possibility. Some titles: Against Storm, Against Glib Thunder, I Won't Beg, She Is What I Undo, Unlike My Sister. These are poems that dwell richly, sensuously, in the demonic ground fenced out by paradox and negation. When she writes, quote, "The tree is not a loner type, not a sleeper cell, not a jumpy trigger," I think we hear the full potential of this mode, which deftly makes present a particular psychology, the scale of its verbal agency, and the weight of the cultural, corporal, and poetic context that presses down upon it. But this is all to dwell perhaps on what Harris's poetry isn't, on the negative spaces it adroitly gathers around itself. To read her poetry is to be immersed in its enormous exuberance, its play, wit, sensuality, humor, and figuration. Hers is a Baroque fluency that, grounded in physical bodies and scenes, delights without deluding. I think of the poem, quote, "So is we thinking up new ways to fuck or nah?" in which, quote, Harris writes, "Is we sealing bouts of honey so raw? Can we steely run? A grip that's flawed? Can I sling another niche that's maw?" I hear in this tightly looping sound work, language rippling just ahead of thinking, language loosening body into ecstatic flesh, then scripting flesh back into changed subjects, objects, bodies. For me, this is the most enduring flavor Harris's work leaves in the mind, a virtuosic joy in the physicality of language and the intelligence of the body. Her many honors include the Lambda Literary Award and Audre Lorde Awards, and fellowships from the NEA, MacDowell, and the Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library. She's an associate professor of English at the University of Houston. Please join me in welcoming Francine Harris to Berkeley.
Noah, oh my goodness. That introduction kind of made me cry. You know, it's funny. I think what happens is that people say things about your writing that you never thought about before. And one of the things that you said, which I wrote down, was about something I can't pronounce, but you said Deixis as a self-reflective punishment. And I thought, oh, God. Oh my goodness. So thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Jeffrey and Jessica, for organizing this and for having me. And thank you for everybody for coming. I just made a decision about my reading. So I wanted to read a few poems from the book, and I think I'm going to read a few poems from my current manuscript, I guess my fourth manuscript. And sometimes I don't read these poems because I feel like I have to explain a lot. So I'm going to try not to explain too much. I kind of want to see what happens if I don't explain too much. I'm going to tell you what it's about, but I'm not going to do the whole like historical thing that I often do when I read these poems, because I just want to see what happens. And I trust that y'all can Google. From the book, one of the poems that Pedro read, which one was it? Oh shoot, I thought I wrote it down. I really thought I wrote it down. It was one of the early poems. I know it had duotrope in the title, but now I can't remember the title. But it made me think of this poem from Here's a Sweet Hand called Barycenter, which is a weird poem to be starting with because it's loopy. I can't find it. I had it marked. There it is. Okay. All right. Barycenter. I was the I want you. I was the hungry at girl and girl glass. And everything changed when the brown dwarf saw its star food. Everything changed when the hungry reached in where its hand would naturally reach. I was that one, that implosion who would be in the would-be window, who would reach the I want you through the echo explosion be damned. I was the two-body problem. Your lids would reflect a flashback. We would be twin-year lens, close to red suns, who would match your would-be lip. So I would be your sister then, since you put it that way, touching you where it would be normal then. I would be food and would take place in a breath, a second star, where the I want you would be gases only a scope could reach. Then, of course, you would have to look, and it would change everything. Now I am the would-be, the it then, the heat, hunger changed to light, hydrogen double-talked into spitting cloud. It would be food to a hungry. And it would take a million to hear you because it would be spinning winter. Your eyes would get hoarse in the damp light because I love brown fallout. And so, of course, your voice would muffle under weight and you would keep saying molecule one after the other like that. And they would make up this name debris. And of course, you would hate that, the hunger and orbit and wobble, because they would be familiar then too, of course, why I hated yours too, so it makes sense. I would say it easier because firstborn maybe, that protostar, a potential for light. You would hate that in your sister. Naturally, you would abort plans and stain eyelids in a would-be dust blood letter for what marks left in the sky, and it would bludgeon the drift. Your heavy throat would make those gases tangle like cord. I was forever to see it all before it happened, so the telescope, I would smell choke, and you would map it out, hungry for familiar light. Our separate birds would watch all familiar people die like this then, destined, since you say so, doomed not to fall into one another's pitch of family grave. Lips still aflame, you would watch me orphan, mouth out mother and sing me tra-la-la. It would hurt my ears. You would be hunger food. So of course, sputtering, I would see those other stars fall out into gray silt, and I would perch on your aching spine. I would ha-la-la, and you would hear it all wrong. And you would say, you fucking talk too much. And yes, I of course glutton, now that you mention it. I guess we would window break each other in less than perfect siblings, sorry the blood, that I would be your hunger sister, star sister, and naturally we would dwarf to each spin, a fail, so it all makes sense. I feel like I added some words in there, but that's okay. This poem is called I Won't Beg. I have before. I took off a skin, I put it in paint. I tried to make it better with me than doing it alone. I won't fall off. The escape is shaky. It looks out over boys driving cars with toy black remotes. They are actually men. They are men in the wide zoom of street. Engine makes them hug. They trade the remotes loud over bright green skins. I won't panic. The plastic so fat and wide it can get in the lane. It can do a 180. I won't sick. It's a lump in the throat when the dirt bikes head out in a rip to twilight. They hop off. I won't jump as they tilt a ruddy thing and hand it over to the next. The chest is sore right there. I won't beg. The blast of generators spits out dirty white light. A white man on the train with enormous eyes put his fingers in the shape of a gun and shot another white man twice in the face. Before he deboarded, he said, fuck white supremacy, you're all gonna pay. And I won't body, I won't block. I am putting the tip of his finger to my forehead. I won't yank. When I open the door, I am the whole brick wall. It's impossible angle. I am looking out the window at night against the glare of light. I can only see the men who ground in voices. I feel like I should say some things because we're here together and it's a digital room. It just makes some sense to say some things. Some of this book I wrote, Noah mentioned that I did a research year at the Coleman Center in New York. And so I moved back to New York after not being there since 2001, actually, when I lived there. And I don't know, I had a very different relationship with the city than I had with it the first time. It felt very, maybe it's because I was living in Harlem and working in Midtown, and it just felt very hectic. So several of these poems are from that experience. Maybe I'll just read. There's a suite of poems here, and I'll read one of those. This is Sonata in F minor, K183 Allegro. Car tires rush through and announce the rain. You can hear the shuffling of someone street sweeping in the street. The insistent men outside stingrays, the cutoff lull of ambulance testing siren, the women who step in the street and yell to anyone they loved once. And it sounds like prelude. If Scarlatti hadn't moved to Madrid, would he have moved the notes diatonically as the rain falls up a roof, ascends the scaffolding? It's impossible to read The Street without seeing Mrs. Hedges on mine, leaning from a window on the ground, level of my building, peering out under her red bandana, considering me as I lean my body over the rail and watch the men dressed black and in gray. I tell a man to stop peeing on my car. And when he turns around, he is not surprised. He says he isn't peeing, he is counting his money. I'm going to read Unlike My Sister because you mentioned it. It's actually, that I can remember, I think it's the only poem that I've ever written about my actual sister. Unlike my sister. Unlike my sister, I don't have children I won't bring to the city or the city beach or the monkey bars. I don't curl my eyelashes in the mirror with a whiteness or a woman or an iron bar. I don't trek sperm into cookie jars or drag Budweiser blankets to the pines or skulls when the priest crosses my mother. I don't touch married men in their necks. I am at my mother's funeral and scissor off her hair and touch her fat lip. I don't have any children who don't know their grandmother or old trees or blood orange. I pull with both hands and both teeth, and I wait until it's ready. I watch the sun go first. I don't get high with mother's husbands or blow smoke in their dark mouths or push tongue. I don't believe marrying a white man will fix anything or fork real good or take it back. That was kind of a lie, and I can say it was a lie. I don't use pink makeup. I don't like to lie. I don't have any children who don't believe in damage, who push metal up under cats' tails or blow tire smoke into married men's throats. I don't like funerals, and so I keep them to myself. And so I touch them with my teeth. In fact, I'm not the clammy beach or the monkey bars or a little girl's skirt hiked up. I don't show up in my sister's mirror or on the grass in a glassy glitter or in her spit. This is called The Day After 12 Years a Slave. And I don't know, I think about this book actually a bit locationally. There's also a handful of poems that were written while I was living in northern Michigan, not far from Traverse City. If y'all know that area. Why the culture shock? Even though I was from Detroit. Detroit is a different Michigan than Traverse City is. The day after 12 years a slave, I make a stew. While one side of the landlord's futon gives out, the other rests on one bolt. It all tips sideways, and then the mailman's footprints in snow. The pot is on the stove, but the meat is off. Do I throw out the meat or eat the meat? The meat smells like a slaughterhouse, it did. When it opened, a dead pigeon lies in a pan. Blowflies, the squeal of a small calf. No one mentions the smell on their recipe blog. The snow piles windrift, one screw and then the other. The maintenance man is suspicious of callers, also, I think, on heroin. Your control is out, so be it, a fish sauce, a splatter of thyme and cabbage. The cat is a perched killer, the cutting board smeared parsley. Northup had his own tune, choke sometimes, an ulcer of blear. I cry at the bleak rendering, the festival finish. The chair squeals when I forget and fall on it. The house has it now. It's all in the curtains. You cook until you have to give up and give in. A Dutch oven keeps centuries vapor and a cow. What became of it? Just to wind up in the trash, a starter, a hope for something right. I can see it there marooned. There was that breath on the caterpillar. It ruined the whole crop. Okay, I'm gonna read one more from this book, but I'm gonna come back to it. So remind me. You who I can't hear. Okay, I'll read a couple little new poems and then I'll read a few poems from this manuscript. There is the beauty that'll stay here with us, like how soap still loves the virus, wants nothing more than to whisk it all away. Daily Marriott, fat of fruit, fat of the milking cow, lipid loving lipid, same fat loving, hydrophobic in a good way, salt of the fat in that gets to virus by doing it hydro, riding stream to figure out how to love, loves how perfectly wet it makes way for virus to hover inside the terrain of greasy tail, loving it to a silky death, loving it to its silty bottom, its gray water spiral, loving the virus until it can no longer function, melting its fatty fat heart to the bond of love and rip it all away, little soap bar player, little Dionysian pump, inserting itself into every hydrophilic mouth. How human it is to love the virus to its death, to take it dizzy and broken from its panicked host. Waterphilia, fat love gone viral, slow love soaping rub time to seduce virus from our warm, wet, living hands. Maybe that should have gone in the book because it's got hands in it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I'll read this one and then I'll do the manuscript poems. Pretty soon the lilies, after Mattia Harvey. Pretty soon the lilies will stick underneath the door. That's about all I can say for pity. Pity the door, its square embrace on the flower's stupid form. It's a line I like to misquote from a book that made me want a more lily life, a houseboat on the water docked, so that beside wind the little floor would sway as I didn't even have to try to sleep. Violets suffice without the melatonin. It's not perfect, but it is a threshold. In a film, I stand on one side and he stands on the other. In that film, we wait out the whole evening until it's safe to talk. Then we talk through the door. But in a reality show, they tried that. It didn't work ultimately. They were both rather shit. We are both the shit our parents did. Unpotted the plants, blamed the neighbors, took off all the doors. I suspect the noise I hear in the walls is not so sweet that flowers are growing. Sometimes I am naked and I get a thorn where a stamen should go. In the docked house, I could have made wailing like the foghorn fog rolling in. I guess that would have let everyone know on the weather, but shit is shit, and manure only works on a horticultural scale. I am holding out the shapes at eye level, so they look like petals over the horizon. Okay. So this fourth manuscript that I'm working on, it's kind of about my dad. And there's a long poem at the middle of it that I won't bore you to tears with. Plus, I can't get it right. Long poems are very, very hard for me. This is like pages long. But the other part of it is about this dude named Father Divine, who was a self-divinated spiritual leader of the early 20th century in New York. That's really all I need to tell you. I imagine you can figure out the rest. You know, there were communes, they were celibate. What more do you need to know? All right. I will say that he amassed a lot of wealth. I'll say that, like collective. Anyway, here's some poems. And everyone's father is divine, particularly the song, specifically glory. In some moment, some plot of land or which omniscience, a twinkle maybe like an almost star upon which we wished their stature. Every child is faithful, Mary, drug in, made to worship, and leaning over the memory of an easy founder, says that name of God, stands up straight and tall, and upon excommunication always begs to be let back in. It's no wonder we stab a man and take all the money, cursed with the divine Father. We made the kitchen water to hear him holy, passing each and every plate, cutting duck. In your house, you listened for his footsteps. You know the sound. You know it most in evenings when some small death in you hurries to fear they may not come. And if they never did, as I suspect you'll want to argue, you know that sound too. That's my point. Every father is someone's divine. On how you look, staring up the ceiling, running the walls with conflicting reports. One legend has it, he falls from a bridge, boots still on. That's why he couldn't come. The needle stuck so deep in the corner of his socket, he forgot you were born. The bottle so heavy it set upon his chest. The pussy so good he'd make him another. Just like that. In a dream, he walks without any legs at all. His gait, half lamb, from what you've never heard of. And if you ever doubted that all the steps would happen, you know what it means when he descends the stairs and you and everyone else in that hungry room is already on their feet shouting, "Peace, Father." And the dinner was lovely. When the cook, the air is filled with the hang of boiled salt. The windows steam and salt lingers in the scorched air. The steam on the panes is salt and white, and the shed of hide, a foam off the fat removed. It's health he's good at. The broccoli falls from its stalk, the mushroom tender, and the earth is with us, and all that lives inside. He says the roots won't butter themselves. He means holy, a manifest communion. The fat on a hip is a muscle and glory starching out water. Under us, tap counting. Overhead, mothers don't matter to God, only bursting. The lemon over fish, cracked pepper, the window through its trouble. But what's it matter? The women all humming. Father Divine feeds them tender with a touch on every bone, with his heart sleeved in pink of cuts meat, with his fingers in the wet meat pie. The secretaries check paint on the walls, clean with Q-tips. The utensils sing, the burn in the pots, the seasoning skillet. The secretaries cite this routine and appoint it to song. Miss Moonbeam, mist in the beaming moon, mist in the edge of city against the sturdy light. We're all here. Merry bird tree. That is a wreck for us swallows. A harvest, a red branch, and an otherwise quartered and difficult structure. Mother in the second body. The first was a roast of clay, a body over a body, a hint of gray. And the line ahead, all wait for Reverend. Her smile is placid like muslin of a pattern yet to be sewn. Some of what I wound up thinking about and writing these poems was about I guess I wound up calling it alternative intimacies. Like, you know, if you're not supposed to be doing it, then what are you doing? And I think this is one of those poems, if I'm not mistaken. And I go in that house. It's a room full of the divinity room, you know, where the plants are squat, the light too bright, the air is stripped, the lamps are stretched, whatever might break. The whispers now in a softened shoe, the lace on countertop, the stove a brick, heavy belly of Dutch furnace caught in a wall. Faith in the room has gotten rips in the stocking, its powder on thick, its voice in a hornet, its whole ceiling is shaking. A barter in the flooring is mopped to a crack the way it stares, the beams are buckling. The way it laughs, the sun is stuck in silver, in slivers between the joints, and eventually it's coming apart. In the buzzing room, the flutter, the hub of angelic, the swarm beatific in white windows, and here they are. And yet, what if beneath the glass is frozen, and which may be starved of sunlight, to wonder if it is a reflection of God startling them into song, or if it's an echo of the pains rattling, the tremble of sudden thaw. The room for mothers is very still. Gates block the door to stand on the other side and peer into case, which frames the chairs, the antique imported, its red rug ripped, its gilded vanities. Oh, it is glued. Oh, it is lit with tiny bulbs of electricity. Oh, there was meant to be a fire once, the ash, the tiny iron poker nearest the tiniest fire pit. In the room which is running out of room, the room spills into a crane, and the crane is tipped, and its maze is delirious spinning, its housing full of room. The doors lay sideways along the doors, the middle of room is out of air. The end of the hall is getting in. The trees outside had started to creak. The pies on the sill are fattening, bluish, crushing themselves. They stink. I think I may just do one more from this and then I'll read you one last one from the book. Actually, I have no idea what time it is, but I think I'm okay. Let me go back up. Okay. And then he cut his younger hair, for which she may have felt a little less old, or in the way for which she may have kissed the top of his gleaming scalp, for which she may have turned about in the chair blushing. She may have stuck her chest out. She may have danced around the silver trays. She may have brushed her own hair out, and he may have sat smiling, writing a new sermon. Or he may have taken the brush and told her to lift her chin. Or he may have handed her a mirror and asked her if she saw its mystery. Either way, the night would have rung out with snowy owls in the cottonwood trees. Either way, they would have come a long way to make a nest and hunker down over no babies. Regardless to the difference in age, the beavers are overpopulating. Despite her height above his clean, holy head, Possum carried Passel on their packs. They cling to the fur of their gills as she would have scurried along the warm barrier. And she would have undoubtedly sung. There was always singing in the decision to avoid touch. Okay. All right. I just have one more poem from the book, and then I think we just say goodbye. It's kind of a prayer, I think. It's called Ablate the Sun Cups, Not the Ice, an incantation. O God of the de-sublime, allay the vertical penitents their limbs, rest them back cold, not in precipitate, but in seed and potential of hydrogen. Spoon in density to be sung of their winter's seed and soak. Sip pond to sun cups over sunrise, far from the flat dispatch of heat, its stench, its wayward ever summer barge, and fall out. Jesus, be a river, be an untainted float of deliquescent surge, be saltless and cold. O pose of hope, allay the waterfall, hear their prayer. O bed of oxygen, divine surge, be also brackish sea. Be seed of the frost and supercold, be shade soup. Sweet hell of beloved drench and mitochondrial belly, be flint for the watery flame. Douse out the eventual crunch, the big scorch, the rip of our primordial anus and mouth, suckling at the place of eco-abundance. O sweet bioteat, O hydroscopic Lourdes, were we to sit still and let ourselves be cold for hours, wiped of web-crack frost, mild sud of the slow glacier, rime vat at the edge of rash season, our legs from twitching, O known keep of tomorrow, might we skill our motor by, pedal from the crib of our await. O stable evolver, an alms for safe passage, your earthen cooling, forgive us our erosion, heal the demanding snows. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pedro and Francine, you whom we could hear, and we did. And thank you to Bea and Noah for introducing us to that, I thought, beautifully paired work, so much freighted weather in there. Please come back on April 8th for El Grupo and on the 14th for Jen Hoffer. And thank you for letting poetry interrupt everything else for a second. Take care. Bye.